Thanks for tuning into Know Wine in No Time. I'm your host Dave, and today we're talking about a specific grape growing region and wine producing area called Madiran. So Madiran is a specific AOC, Appellation Madiran Contrôlée area in southwest France, and it focuses on one grape and one grape specifically, and that's a grape called Tannins. And I want to introduce you to that grape because it's not a common household name. So Tannins, the T is actually silent, is a very thick-skinned, very, very tannic grape. One of the most tannic grapes in the world. And think about how a wine gets tannins into it. It gets them from its skins. So anytime we leave grape skins in contact with juice for long periods of time, we get A, color, and B, tannins. So think about making a cup of tea. If we make a cup of tea and we leave the tea bag in for 2 minutes, for example, we'll have lightly colored tea. It'll be lightly tannic. If we leave the tea in for 10 or 15 minutes, the tea is much darker in color and much more tannic. So the same thing happens with wine, but not in terms of minutes, but in terms of days. Now in this particular town of Madiran, Tannins is so important to this wine that it's given a minimum. So in a Madiran Rouge, or a red Madiran wine, it has to be a minimum of 70% Tannins. And there are 4 different blending grapes that are allowed by law, and they are Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and a native grape called Fer Cervedoux. And that's obviously not a household name, but that's a grape that's just specifically from that area. Now, to keep the wine of the highest level of quality, those grapes themselves must all be individually destemmed prior to producing the wine. So think about having vats of grapes that are all hanging from their stems. We've got to pull those grapes off the stems before they can be crushed. That's very important because on a grape like Tannins, we can have a wine that's extremely tannic, and by removing some of the stems, we keep some of the tannins in check. Also, yields are vitally important in this area. So to get the highest quality grape yields that we possibly can, we've got to make sure that we don't overproduce the grapes. So techniques like dry harvesting, in other words, going into the vineyard, say in June, and cutting off half of the berries before they mature, keeps the yield low. Now, why would we want to do that? Because the resultant fruit gets 100% of the energy from the actual root and vine stock of that particular plant. So low is the yield in Madiran that it actually cannot exceed 3.3 tons per acre. Just to give you an idea, in California, 10 to 15 tons per acre is not unusual. So just 3.3 tons of fruit per acre, but think of the exceptional quality of that particular grapes. So when we think about a very tannic, very full-bodied wine, how do we keep control over that? Well, there was a scientist that in the early 90s produced a technique called micro-oxygenation. Micro-oxygenation. And what that means is when the grape juice is first rendered, they actually bubble a little bit of oxygen through the grape juice. That was pioneered in Madiran. And the reason why we do that is because that by bubbling the oxygen through the grape juice, we actually have tannins that will bind together and subsequently pull out of the mixture. Now these are a lot of extra steps, micro-oxygenation, removing the stems before crushing, but a wine like this with such a tremendous potential for tannins, actually that needs to be done. So I have a wine to sample today from Domaine du Moulay. So Domaine du Moulay is a Madiran AOC level wine made from Tannins grapes. So with this particular type of wine, let's talk about what we can expect. A very dark, very inky, very tannic wine that you actually can't see through. And if we swirl to liberate some of the aromas, what meets us are the aromas of very rich dark fruits and a little bit of black licorice or anise on the aromas. Taste the wine. A Madiran Tannins hits the front side of the palate with something like a tart Rainier cherry. So vibrantly acidic, but yet very fruity, but not a dark fruit like a plum, but more like a tart cherry. Mid-palate, the acidity continues, and then on the back side of the palate, we feel the grip of the tannins and the structure of the wine itself. So a Madiran Tannins is a wine that would go beautifully with any high protein, higher fat type of meal. So if we think about steaks, we think about something more on the ribeye or the prime rib side. If we're thinking about even some fatty pork dishes, this would go quite well. I love a Madiran with barbecued ribs. So think about that. We have baby back ribs, lots of fat in there, a little bit of savoriness from the sauce, a nice tannic, tart, crisp wine meshes beautifully with that type of cuisine. So I'm going to enjoy a little bit more of this Madiran. That's all the time we have for today, and I ask that you tune in next time, because soon you'll know wine in no time.